Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for over 14 years, and throughout that extensive career, he had witnessed countless moments that reminded him why human connection mattered more than any game or prize money. He had celebrated with families who desperately needed financial relief, shared tears with contestants who revealed personal struggles, and created space for genuine emotion that transcended entertainment and touched something fundamental about shared human experience. On this cold December afternoon in 2025, as he prepared to welcome two families onto the stage for what appeared to be routine programming, Steve had no indication that he was about to meet someone whose story of loss would affect him so profoundly that it would remind him why compassion and presence matter more than any scripted response or professional distance. What would unfold over the next hour would become one of the most emotionally powerful and deeply moving moments in game show history, demonstrating that sometimes the most important thing we can offer someone experiencing unimaginable grief is simply our willingness to witness their pain with genuine compassion and without trying to fix what cannot be fixed. Before we explore this extraordinarily sad but ultimately hopeful story about loss, grief, and the healing power of human connection, if you believe that showing up for people in their darkest moments matters, and that compassion can provide comfort even when circumstances cannot be changed, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss these powerful reminders of why kindness and empathy define our humanity. The Porter family from Chicago, Illinois stood ready to compete, and leading them was 38-year-old Lisa Porter. Lisa presented as a composed woman whose careful smile suggested someone working hard to maintain emotional control in a setting that required public engagement. She had introduced herself during preliminary interviews as an elementary school teacher who specialized in working with children who had experienced trauma or loss, describing her work with obvious dedication, but with an emotional weight that seemed disproportionate to typical professional commitment. Standing beside Lisa were her younger brother Michael, her sister-in-law Rachel, her close friend Jennifer, who Lisa described as her rock during difficult times, and a woman named Susan, who Lisa introduced as her grief counselor and someone who had become like family through their work together. The group demonstrated gentle support and obvious concern for Lisa that went beyond typical family dynamics, creating an atmosphere that Steve immediately recognized as indicating someone navigating significant emotional challenges. Lisa Porter had built what appeared from external observation to be a meaningful life characterized by professional dedication to helping children, close relationships with family and friends, and the kind of purposeful existence that reflected conscious choices about what mattered most. She had always wanted to be a teacher and had pursued that career path with determination and focus, earning her education degree and establishing herself as an exceptionally skilled and compassionate educator who had a particular gift for connecting with students who were struggling emotionally or behaviorally. Her colleagues and administrators recognized Lisa as someone who brought not just professional competence, but genuine care and investment in every student's well-being, creating classroom environments where children felt safe enough to learn and grow even when their home lives were chaotic or painful. What very few people in Lisa's current life fully understood, what she had kept largely private, except with her closest family and her therapist, was that Lisa's expertise in working with traumatized children derived from her own devastating experience of loss that had fundamentally altered the trajectory of her life. 4 years earlier, Lisa had been married to her college sweetheart Daniel, and they had two young daughters whom they adored completely. Emma had been 6 years old and Sophie had been 4, and both girls had been healthy, happy children who filled their parents' lives with joy and purpose. Lisa and Daniel had been planning their future together, discussing the possibility of having a third child, considering a move to a larger house with a better school district, and building the kind of stable family life that both of them had dreamed about during their courtship and early marriage. The tragedy that destroyed Lisa's family had occurred on an ordinary Saturday morning in March, when Daniel had taken both girls to a nearby park for a few hours of play, while Lisa stayed home to complete some work projects and have some rare quiet time to herself. The park was located near a busy intersection, and the route from their house required crossing a major street at a marked crosswalk with traffic signals. Daniel had always been extremely careful about safety when out with the children, holding their hands tightly when crossing streets, and teaching them about traffic awareness and the importance of following pedestrian signals. What happened that morning had been the result of a driver who ran a red light while texting on his phone, speeding through the intersection at nearly 50 miles per hour despite the signal clearly indicating he needed to stop. Daniel and the girls had been crossing legally during their walk signal when the vehicle struck all three of them. The driver had never even touched his brakes before impact, having been completely distracted by his phone and unaware that he had run a red light until after the collision had occurred. The accident had been catastrophic. Both Emma and Sophie had been killed instantly, their small bodies unable to withstand the force of impact. Daniel had died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, his injuries too severe for medical intervention to make any difference. Lisa had been home when the police arrived at her door to inform her that her entire family had been killed in a traffic accident. The officer who delivered the news later told colleagues that Lisa's reaction had been unlike anything he had encountered in 20 years of law enforcement, a combination of complete shock that rendered her almost catatonic, followed by primal grief, so overwhelming that it seemed impossible that any human being could survive such emotional devastation. Lisa had no memory of the hours immediately following the notification, later learning from her brother Michael that she had collapsed and had to be sedated by emergency medical personnel who were called to help manage her psychological crisis. The days and weeks that followed had existed in a fog of unbearable grief as Lisa navigated funeral arrangements for her husband and both daughters, answered questions from investigators about the accident, and tried to comprehend that her entire family was gone because someone had been looking at their phone instead of paying attention to the road. The driver who had caused the accident had been charged with 3 counts of vehicular manslaughter, had eventually pleaded guilty, and had been sentenced to 12 years in prison. The legal proceedings had provided no comfort or closure to Lisa, who could not understand how 12 years of imprisonment could possibly be adequate punishment for destroying 3 innocent lives and for taking everything that had given her life meaning and purpose. The grief Lisa experienced in the aftermath of losing her husband and both children had been so profound and all-consuming that for many months she had been unable to function in even the most basic ways. She had taken extended leave from her teaching position, had moved temporarily into her brother's home because she could not bear to be in the house where her family had lived and where every room held memories that were now unbearably painful, and had required intensive therapy and medication to manage depression and trauma symptoms that threatened to overwhelm her completely. She had experienced suicidal ideation during the darkest periods, feeling that life without Daniel and Emma and Sophie was not worth living, and that joining them in death would be preferable to enduring the constant ache of their absence. What had ultimately saved Lisa from complete despair had been the combination of intensive therapy with Susan, her grief counselor who specialized in working with people who had experienced catastrophic loss, and the unwavering support of her brother Michael and her friend Jennifer, who had essentially devoted themselves to keeping Lisa alive during those first terrible months. Susan had worked with Lisa using approaches specifically designed for complex grief and trauma, helping her process not just the loss of her family, but also the traumatic nature of their deaths, and the guilt Lisa experienced about having stayed home that morning instead of accompanying them to the park. Over time, with extensive therapeutic support and the patient presence of people who loved her, Lisa had gradually begun to rebuild some semblance of functionality, though she recognized that she would never fully recover from the magnitude of what she had lost. She had eventually returned to teaching, finding that working with children provided some small measure of purpose and meaning, even though being around young students also triggered constant reminders of her own daughters who would never grow up. She had discovered that her personal experience of devastating loss, while unbearably painful, gave her unique insight into the emotional needs of students who were dealing with their own experiences of death, divorce, or trauma, and she had redirected her professional focus specifically towards supporting children navigating grief and loss. The decision to apply for Family Feud had been suggested by Susan, Lisa's therapist, as part of ongoing work on engaging with life and creating new experiences, despite the permanent absence of the family Lisa had lost. Susan had proposed that participating in a lighthearted activity with supportive people who understood Lisa's history might represent a small step toward acknowledging that life could contain moments of enjoyment even while carrying profound grief. Lisa had been extremely hesitant, uncomfortable with the idea of appearing happy or enthusiastic on television when her heart remained shattered by loss that would never heal. However, Susan had gently challenged Lisa's belief that experiencing any pleasure or joy represented betrayal of Daniel and the girls, helping Lisa understand that they would have wanted her to continue living as fully as possible despite their absence. As Steve Harvey began the game with characteristic warmth and energy, the Porter family played cautiously. Lisa answered questions when her turn came, but demonstrated none of the excitement or enthusiasm typical of Family Feud contestants, responding in measured tones that suggested someone going through motions rather than genuinely engaging. Steve noticed Lisa's subdued demeanor and recognized the careful emotional control that suggested someone managing significant pain or loss. During a commercial break, he approached Lisa and asked gently whether she was doing okay, noting that she seemed more serious than most contestants and wanting to make sure she felt comfortable. Lisa had smiled politely and assured Steve that she was fine, just a bit nervous about being on television. Steve had accepted this explanation, but had continued paying close attention to Lisa throughout the game, sensing that there was more to her story than simple nervousness about the cameras. The moment that changed everything occurred during the fourth round, when the question appeared asking contestants to name something you wish you could do one more time with someone you love. Lisa buzzed in first and stood frozen for a long moment, her expression shifting through emotions that everyone watching could see were overwhelming. Finally, she answered with a voice that broke on every word, stating, "Tuck my daughters into bed and tell them I love them." The studio fell into immediate silence as the raw grief in Lisa's voice registered with everyone present. Steve set his cards down carefully and looked at Lisa with concern and compassion, recognizing instantly that she had answered from a place of profound personal loss rather than hypothetical speculation. The answer was on the board as the number one response, but nobody applauded. Instead, there was only respectful quiet as people waited to see what would happen next. Steve approached Lisa slowly and asked with gentle directness whether she was willing to share what had happened to her daughters or whether she preferred to keep that private. Lisa stood motionless for several seconds, tears streaming down her face, and then made the decision to speak the truth that she had been carrying for 4 years. She stated simply that her husband and both of her daughters had been killed 4 years earlier by a distracted driver who ran a red light while texting, that they had all died on an ordinary Saturday morning while she was home alone, and that she lived every day with the knowledge that her entire family was gone and would never come back. Steve Harvey's face immediately reflected profound shock and sorrow as he processed what Lisa had just revealed. He stood motionless for a long moment, visibly struggling with how to respond to a confession of loss so staggering and devastating that no words seemed adequate or appropriate. Finally, he did something that would become one of the most remembered moments in Family Feud history. He walked directly to Lisa, opened his arms, and simply held her while she sobbed, offering no platitudes or attempts to make the situation better, just his presence and his willingness to witness her pain without trying to diminish or fix it. If this story has moved you, if Steve's compassionate response to Lisa's unbearable grief has reminded you that sometimes presence matters more than words, and that witnessing pain with genuine empathy provides comfort even when circumstances cannot be changed, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel to ensure you never miss these powerful reminders that compassion and human connection matter more than anything else we can offer people experiencing devastating loss.